Please sit down. Let's start in 1 minute. Ivan, sit down, please. I will start without any, because we are online, and let's start our meetup. My name is Andrei Dzemianchyk. I'm software architect, and today our topic is authentication from theory to practice. Let's discuss. Okay, about me. In software development, I've been in for 18 years, software architect 5 years, worked in different domains. It is healthcare, enterprise, educational, logistics, fintech, and so on. Different clouds, AWS, Azure, Oracle Cloud, some small experiences with Google Cloud. Here is my LinkedIn profile. If you would like, you can subscribe me. Oh, just now only photo. Okay, today's our topic is authentication. This is a very complex question, to be honest. There are now a lot of people who can't answer correctly what is authentication. And there are two similar terms like authentication and authorization, and not all even developers can find the difference between them. Just a small example from the life. If you enter a bar and the barman asks you, tell you, hello, Andrei, nice to meet you, this is authentication. But if I request, give me a beer, and barman says, no, you haven't been paid your previous bill, or give me the beer, this is authorization. So authentication is verifying who you are, and authorization, what you can do here or with this object. And really, these two terms we combine together to access something and to use it, and to allow your users, your applications, your systems to do something with your data, your stuff, and so on. Yeah. Why authentication is so important for us developers, architects, and product owners even, and for the business? There is a report, OWASP Top 10 Security Risks. Some professionals every several years define such list of risks, the critical risks for the web and not only applications. And number 7 is notification failures. So you see that this is very important to identify your user correctly. And it can lead to brute force attacks, session hijacking, and session fixation. And for example, lack of proper account locking can lead to that if your credentials were stolen, you can't block this user, and you can yeah, it can be a damage for your system, and some data can leak. Well, from statistics, about 80% on significant breaches were linked to authentication weaknesses and financial services. Yeah, and another statistic says that 81% of breaches due to misused credentials, highlighting the privilege issues, weak or stolen password. And web application vulnerabilities, about 45% of web application suffered from broken authentication vulnerabilities, and some of them were critical. I guess even many of which were classified as critical. So this topic is very important to be sure that your application works correctly and your data is secure, and your users can, and you can guarantee that users' data is secure, and your own data too. Let's continue with the theory. Authentication types. There are 6 most common types. It can be knowledge-based, usually our password, PIN, code, security questions. It's something you know. So you know, and only it knows. You know, and you can share with the system, and system can identify that you are the correct guy. Possession-based, something you have. Like you have a special device that belongs to you only, smart card, security token, physical security token, or not only physical, but store it on your laptop. Inheritance-based, something you are, like your fingerprint, face ID, voice scan, and so on. And location-based, like where you are, like restriction by IP address and GPS indication. Adaptive context-based is something you do. It means that device can recognize that your behavior is correct, or maybe some AI-based checks like new captcha that can identify that you are person or not the bot. And this last one is multi-factor. It's a combination of 2 or several previous authentication types, like password plus OTP, fingerprint plus PIN, and so on. Let's continue. Authentication methods, especially about web authentication methods. So when you try to authorize and authenticate user in your web application, there are 2 most common ways. The old legacy session-based authentication, and more popular now and more secure on token-based authentication. There are, for example, more methods like basic authentication, but I don't even discuss it now because it's ugly. Yeah. Session-based authentication. Why this is so popular even now? Because this type is server-side, and a lot of frameworks use it out of the box. And even 15 years ago, it was the most popular way to authenticate users. But now token-based authentication is more popular, especially for new applications. This is mostly client-side authentication, because client stores tokens and sends to backend to the server, and then server validates it. Yeah, if we are talking about session-based, this is in most cases tasteful. It means that session is stored on server side, and if, of course, it is possible to store in some distributed cache or database, but very often, especially for legacy applications, it is stored in memory of the instance. And in this case, this is really stateful. Yeah, and even if you store in database, it's stateful. Stateless, token-based authentication stateless. You shouldn't store on server anything, and any node of your server can identify that this token and authorize and authenticate this user. Security, session-based less secure, tokens more. Cross-domain support, yeah. For session-based, in most cases, sessions are based on cookies, and this is not easy to share cookies between subdomains or different domains. For token, it doesn't matter really. You need only token validation by public key or some other way, like endpoint to validate token. Performance, again, session-based less, because you should check, you should store sessions, you should validate it. For token-based, much better. And in distributed systems, it is difficult to use, and revoke and access, easy in session-based authentication. And that's why if you have such requirement from business to revoke your tokens, this is more complex for token-based authentication, because you should guarantee that token is invalid. But as server doesn't have any information about tokens, by default, it is impossible, because a token contains expiration date, for example, and you can check if token is valid, but if it's revoked, this is a problem. In this case, you need some more complex solution, like a list of revoked tokens, and each token you should check if it belongs to this list, and so on. This is a minus of this method, and if there is a strict requirement to have immediately revoke your token, maybe you can consider session-based authentication or implement this more complex logic. Continue. Yeah, as I mentioned, that session-based is simpler. For traditional, I mean, legacy in most cases, web application with one, when we have usual our 3 levels application, front-end, back-end, and database, without stateless services, without distributed backend, and so on. But of course, yeah, this is almost impossible to scale. And token-based is more scalable. In our modern architecture, we almost always choose this type of authentication. Let's continue with protocols. What is Auth 2? Auth 2, this is authorization, not authentication protocol. Yeah, this is not easy to understand, because it the main idea of this protocol to show to provide access to some specific resources, and it your server can't identify users if you use just strict Auth 2. How it works? Client request, send a request, authorization request, resource owner returns some grant, then client again goes to authorization server and request access token, and after this, with this access token, your client can request access to this particular resource by using resource server. So you see 3 different roles: resource owner, authorization server, and resource server. In most cases, resource owner and authorization server can be combined in one server. We call it authorization server, yeah, because really we know that this server can grant access to resource server. And yeah, but sometimes we can change this implementation, and resource owner request doesn't return real rules for authorization, and we use only authentication flow from this Auth 2 protocol. What I mean that when this protocol returns permissions in your token, so there is a specific field like scope, and based on this scope in the token, you should access or not this particular resource. But very, very often, resource server decides to allow users to use their resources based on other criteria, like specific rules direct on resource server, but with authentication. What does it mean? That we should identify the user, not only allow to authorize some resources based on what resource owner gives you. Grant types. Grant types, this is very important thing. This is types how we can get this token that allows you to get access to resources. There are some things like authorization code, one-time code that can be used to request token. Then implicit flow. This is more simple way when we don't use authorization code flow and just direct request access token. And some other things, client credentials usually is used for service-to-service authentication when we have client static, save it on server side, client side, client ID and client secret, and we send it. And refresh token flow, this is a second step for authentication when you once is authenticated. The second time, you can't input, you shouldn't input your credentials. You can use this special refresh token and get new access token only using this refresh token. Of course, a refresh token lives longer, and it means that when you use website, for example, you input your credentials once, but yeah, periodically your client requests a new access token because the previous expires, and you shouldn't input, and you even don't see that your client requests new token. And in this case, refresh token is more popular. Refresh token can be revoked more easily than access token, because usually server stores refresh tokens instead of otherwise access tokens, because access token doesn't matter to save on server side, because everything that we need is in access token, and we just only verify that this access token is valid. That's why it's stateless. But refresh token can be stateful. This is possible too. Okay, Auth 2 basics. Now we can discuss a bit authorization code grant flow, because this is the most popular flow, and my next examples will be based on this flow. And you see here a sequence diagram, and you have front-end component, back-end component, authorization server. And after user inputs website URL, for example, in browser, front-end component decides, okay, I don't have a token, access token, and redirects you to authorization server page, for example. It's not necessary, but this is just as example. And redirect, and you input login and password on this authorization server side. Authorization server receives your credentials, and not backend, not frontend, really have access to your credentials and don't even store it. This is very important, and to avoid situation when we have some holes in security, yeah, and someone decides to store it on backend side. So authorization server returns authorization code. Now, using this authorization code, we request we request backend, and backend request a new access token. Backend requests a new access token for authorization server with client ID, client secret, that is stored on backend side. It is impossible to. It's possible, but it's not. It doesn't make sense to store a client ID, client secret on front-end side, because front-end usually, if we are talking about web application or even mobile application, front-end is available for everyone, and everyone can receive client ID and client secret. Client ID isn't secure information. It can be visible for users, but client secret, no, because if you have client ID, client secret, you have access to the whole authorization server. Okay, authorization server returns token to backend, backend returns to frontend, and then, frontend sends all next requests to backend with this token, and backend can validate token and decide what this user is and what allowed. Again, it is mostly about authorization, but it is impossible to implement authentication without this flow. Next step the more modern solution is authorization code with PKCE. Yeah, this is not convenient to have a backend path to interact authorization server and get access token, because we would like to have the less dependency between authorization server and our web application. And in this case, there is a solution, PKCE, when frontend generate a special verifier and challenge codes and send direct to authorization server, and the authorization server returns some authorization code plus, and then the same front end with the same code verifier that was generated before request again direct authorization server without backend interaction, and the authorization server check authorization code verifier that it is the same as was initially and return success token. And as you see, there are no client ID, client secret. It's not necessary to store sensitive information front-end side. When we have access token, again, we can go to backend, and you see that backend isn't connected to authorization server, no connections. It's a better solution because everything on front-end and authorization server side. OpenID Connect. OpenID Connect, this is authentication protocol behind Auth 2 authorization protocol. What is the difference? The difference is that OpenID provides additionally to access token, identity token. Sometimes we have some information in access token, like user ID, so really identity token can be ignored. But usually if there is a correct OpenID Connect implementation, system uses identity token to get information from it, like user ID, email, phone, and maybe name, some other information that you can share with this identity. What else? If we are talking about Auth 2, we see that access and refresh token can be any tokens, not necessary to use GWT. In OpenID Connect, we use GWT protocol, so JSON web token. So you always can decode this token using usual algorithm. It's a well-known algorithm, and some libraries can do it. And using this, when you decode it, it's not necessary to have password or something else. So anyone can decode it and use information from it. So you see that OpenID Connect is Auth 2 plus GWT. And scope. If we are talking about Auth 2, scope is like authorization rules, like read messages or write something or else. If you're talking about OpenID Connect, scope contains not allowed, but provided information in this token. So now we discussed OpenID Connect. There are a lot of different implementations of authorization servers. You see, I just added some labels, brands of some most popular of them. Some of them out of the box commercial solutions, something like Spring Security Authorization Server, Spring Boot servers that can be installed and used. We will talk about 3 of them now. This is Keycloak, Microsoft Entra ID, plus AWS Cognito. And let's start with Microsoft Entra ID. What is it? This is Azure cloud-based identity and access management service, and has secure access to different Azure resources like Microsoft 365, different third-party applications. If you read about Entra ID, you will see that there are a huge amount of options, configurations, and the possibility to integrate with Microsoft infrastructure, and complex rules for authentication and authorization, complex business logic and federation, and so on, so on. This is fully managed by cloud and highly scalable. I mean, you shouldn't be aware about your scalability and the load. Microsoft will provide it out of the box. And you shouldn't think about maybe security and compliance as the most part of public cloud services like Microsoft and AWS. They are, for example, HIPAA compliant and PSS compliant and so on. And they are very secure, and you can add additional layers of security. And so, yeah, this is possible to use it with hybrid identity, and if you have some on-premise applications and something on the cloud, you can use Entra ID to authenticate users from your private networks and private infrastructure and so on. This is, yeah, very, very flexible. AWS Cognito. This is similar to Entra ID, less flexible, less configuration. But for example, AWS Cognito has free tier, and this is a good free tier. I don't remember how many users you can use, maybe 500, and it will be free for you if you use other AWS services. So if you implement your web application on AWS, you should always consider this option in the beginning. And only then, if you see that it doesn't suit you in some case, for some reasons, you should select something else. Again, this is fully managed, highly scalable, yeah, integration with all types of AWS services, and again, flexible way to select identity providers and social network integration, and of course, again, advanced security features and compliance. And the last one is Keycloak. This is open source identity access management solution, and it provides authentication authorization services. And it means that this is free and open source. You can even extend it, and you can even I don't recommend to do it, but you can, yeah, use code and add some new logic. But you should install it on your infrastructure, cloud or on-premise, and you should aware about scalability. But again, it supports cluster and several instances. You can use load balancer before it, and load balance between instances and so on. And the main benefit is that it's very, very flexible. You can even manage, you can even configure to use your own database from web application and your tables of users, for example, instead of Active Directory or OLDAP. And you can, yeah, then you can use this table with users in your application, and Keycloak will use the copy or the same table as well. Yeah, again, it supports multiple authentication protocols, identity federation, and the same, you can configure access to Active Directory or other services and so on. And there is a very interesting authorization logic, how to use it for authorization. It's out of scope for this topic, but nevertheless, Keycloak is a very, very good solution. And as for me, from open source tools, so this is the best option. And if you don't want to be, if you want to avoid vendor lock, like AWS and Azure, of course you can select Keycloak. And of course, if you have some restrictions, for example, as for multi-tenancy, but okay, it will be the next. Here is just a simple comparison of main characteristics, and you see almost all of them the same. Single sign-on, multi-factor authorization, identity federation, user management, back office console to add users, to manage users, reset password, for example. All of these tools have it. Customizability. Yeah, cloud services are restricted with customizability, and not everything you can do, especially with AWS Cognito. The main disadvantages for me, for example, is that AWS Cognito doesn't support multi languages for host version, and when you use login and password page from AWS Cognito, not API, and so on. So a lot of different restrictions. Microsoft Entra ID has less restrictions, but nevertheless, not everything you can customize. Keycloak, very customizable, very. Scalability, all of them are scalable. Of course, yeah, Keycloak, you should aware about this yourself. Compliance, security looks like, sorry, this is mistake. This should be on Keycloak. Keycloak depends on config. Because AWS Cognito, Microsoft HIPAA, PCI DSS, GDPR complied out of the box. Microsoft and AWS guarantees that they are compliant and you can easily use it without the additional validation checks, because they have certificates, maybe something else. Keycloak, now, by default, you should configure correctly a lot of things, a lot of stuff. And if you would like to be HIPAA, for example, compliant, you should guarantee that your database backups, for example, are stored in a secure way, encoded, and some other things. So yeah, by default, this is possible to configure it and be secure, but you should spend some time. I mean about Keycloak. Pricing, okay, this again, difference. Free, this is about Keycloak, self-hosted, just infrastructure cost. Pay as you go for Cognito, per user month for Microsoft Entra ID. It means that for AWS Cognito, if you have less than 500 users, it's free tier, then maybe you should pay. I don't remember the next limit, and after this you should switch on some advantage feature and so on. For Microsoft Entra ID, again, per user month pricing, not free tier as I remember. Next, the second part of my presentation is about a real usage of these three servers, authorization service, in real examples. That's why I decided to show you reference architecture for one particular case. This case, this is close to me because I like multi-tenancy. This is SSAS fully multi-tenant web application and mobile application. This is requirements for the case. For example, user should select an organization when opening the application, like select and then authorize and authenticate. And it means that each client, each tenant has a set of its own users. What does it mean? That the same user login can be in different clients and there are different independent users. So I can register in one tenant, then register in the second tenant. That will be different users. When it can be useful, for example, for healthcare applications, when you have some clinics and they use the same multi-tenant application, they provide access to doctors, for example, and doctors should be registered or registers in the clinic, and he should select the clinic and authorize indeed. And the last requirement is OEDC. That is why I showed how it can be implemented. OAuth 2, authorization code with PKCE. Yeah, usual requirement. What is multi-tenancy? Maybe not everyone understands it. This is our software architecture pattern or style where a single instance, a single application serves, stores multiple customer information and data in one place, in a shared environment. It can be the whole multi-tenancy, like database the same, services the same, something in the middle, like, for example, different databases, but the same instances for backend server, something else. But yeah, this is multi-tenancy, and something is shared. Always something, at least small part is shared. And at least we have one flow for authentication and authorization in this case. Okay, comparison multi-tenant features for these three servers. Multi-tenant support Microsoft native. This is very flexible, and there are several even additional tools in Entra, like B2C, Entra ID, and so on. And you can implement very flexible and a good solution using Entra ID. AWS Cognito, no. Unfortunately, I had an example when we did it, and I will share with you. But by default, AWS Cognito has user pool. It's a pool of users, and this user pool contains unique users. And if we are talking about this requirement about each client has a set of its own users and maybe some policies, this is impossible in one pool. That's why you can use, for example, separate user pools for tenants. Each tenant has its own user pool. But you see, it's not by default. In Keycloak, realms, we have realms, and even I know that it's possible to have in one realm multi-tenancy, but the most flexible solution is to use one realm for one tenant, and you can use it to implement it. Same login email on different tenants, as I mentioned, again, by default in Microsoft Entra ID Keycloak and more complex Cognito. Built-in tenant management. Yeah, on Cognito, no, unfortunately. You should implement something. And we will start with AWS Cognito. Yeah, this is a real project reference architecture. We did it for healthcare system. And you see that we have several Cognito user pools for different users. How it works? A user try to authenticate in browser or mobile application. Usually we use some helpers like SDK or library. In our case, Amplify SDK. And login page is on hosted UI option from user pool, but you should receive this link for this particular tenant. You see different user pools, and each user pool has its own unique URL. But okay, let's imagine that we have it. And after user inputs and submits login and password, system redirects again to the front end. Front end receives access token and goes to API gateway. Now will be a big magic. What is the main idea of my reference architectures? The main idea to reduce operations for authentication on backend side. If it is possible to do something on managed by cloud or other service side and don't touch a real code, let's try to do it. And in our case, we have AWS API Gateway. This is managed by AWS service, and it checks, validates tokens from AWS Cognito using a special service Lambda authorizer. But this flow is only because of multi-tenancy. If you don't have multi-tenancy and you use only one pool, you can just simply configure access to public key for this particular pool, and API Gateway will validate token without additional logic. But here we need Lambda authorizer, special service that gets user pool information from DynamoDB, then identify this pool and validate this particular token for this particular tool. Okay, we validated it. What is token validation? Token validation means that we check if this particular token belongs to this authorization server using public key, usually. Public key can be stored on this gateway site, or in this case, we have a link to AWS Cognito user pool, and it reads and stores. And if you change this public key in some time, it will be updated on API gateway site too. But yeah, it validates using public key. I don't want to describe the validation flow, unfortunately, maybe, but yeah. It validates that it belongs to the correct user pool and that expiration date, each GWT token contains expiration date, that expiration date is valid and the token isn't outdated. Okay, and the last thing that API Gateway does is that we try to avoid the situation when backend should validate this, not validate, but parse this token again. And the Lambda authorizer retrieves or parses this token, and all information that we have in our access and access part of token, like user ID, email, and maybe username, phone sometimes, it reads from the token and puts in HTTP headers. And then API Gateway transfers this enhanced request to web service, backend service, and backend service doesn't have at all authentication and authorization. Authorization has, but authentication logic. It receives just user ID, user name, user email, and works with it, not token. Oh, it can receive token because I don't think that we delete from HTTP, but it's kept. So backend service, yeah, this scheme guarantees that backend service will receive, and there are no issues on different service implementation, because we can have hundreds of different services, and all of them should parse this token and get user ID, for example. Maybe in some cases we have error and we can receive incorrect user ID, for example, or we should store a public key to validate token if we are talking about validation again on backend service, and all 100 backend services should have this public key, and if it changes, we should update all these services. Not convenient. So this reference architecture, in this reference architecture, all logic related to authentication is an API gateway side. And backend service, for example, in Java, we can even enhance if the token contains roles, enhance headers and send user roles, and then based on these roles and user ID, backend server decides and implement authorization logic for resources. Okay, Entra ID reference architecture. This is a more simple way to implement the same. Instead of library from AWS, we will use a separate library for Microsoft to access Entra ID, from JavaScript, different frameworks, implementation, and maybe some other languages. For mobile applications, this library is available, and so on. Again, a customized page on Microsoft Entra ID to input login and password and all validation, and as in previous, I forgot, you see a multi-factor option is included here and is included here too. So you can switch on it and you will have multi-factor authorization out of the box. So the main recommendation from the previous and this reference architecture that all authentication and login logic is on authorization server side. Okay, then the same flow, generation of PKCE and send to Active Directory, receive token sends to API management services, Azure API management service, and it validate this token easily because we have one Microsoft Entra ID server, not necessary to have for different tenants different instances, because you can support multi-tenancy and the different policies for different tenants and pools out of the box. You can see that you can connect to different Active Directories, for example, one for one tenant, the second for the second, and yeah, you can easily do it. And again, you can transfer headers with JWT to your applications. In this case, it's app service, but it can be Kubernetes cluster or something else, even serverless architecture. So approach is the same, different only implementation. Microsoft Entra ID, API management service, and library to provide access to this service. And the last one, the same implementation for Keycloak. Again, we can use some already implemented libraries like Keycloak adapter for different languages. And we should install in our infrastructure Keycloak cluster or server the same customized page, and you can connect it to Active Directory or database of the system, for example, as I mentioned, because if you would like to store, for example, users and use it in your web application backends in the same database, it is possible. And to provide automatic token validation, I suggest to use OpenResty. This is not extension, but it's a new web server based on Jinx, but extended. This open source tool you can use in Jinx, but token validation and the token and some customization of and additional logic for tokens is allowed only on paid version of Jinx, Jinx Plus, as I remember. That's why OpenResty, open source, if you would like to have everything open source, Keycloak plus OpenResty can be used. And again, you can validate this token for different tenants in different realms. You should only know realm, because realm usually is a path in Keycloak authorization server URL. So this is very simple to identify it. And then you can add logic. JavaScript, as I remember, is used to extend logic and read from token claim and put it to the headers. And then, in our case, virtual machines receives headers with user ID, email, user name, and user, for example, login if it's necessary. This implementation, this is a real implementation in our internal services, in Andersen Lab internal services. We are working, and we would like to present it soon, and Andersen Portal, CRM, and other systems will use it. That's why this is a real reference architecture. Unfortunately, I don't have a good example, a real example of implementation of this, just for Cognito and Keycloak, but I guess everything should be the same. The last page of my presentation, maybe, this is some takeaways. And if we should select from these three authorization servers, if you would like to have something self-hosted, open source, and flexible for multi-tenant, customizable, this is Keycloak. if you use a lot of AWS services, and even if you implement a complex architecture with a huge amount of small authorization rules for different services, because AWS Cognito is, for example, authorization in AWS Cognito can be done only using IAM roles that you have in cloud. So authorization is out of scope by default. Authentication, yes, you can implement for any web application. As I mentioned, it is possible for multi-tenancy, but not easy and more complex than other solutions, but it's possible too. And Entra ID, if you have Azure, for example, cloud, and your infrastructure mainly from Microsoft services, this is a good option. Or even for just for SaaS and multi-tenancy and for complex rules, for example, not sure that you can do even everything that provides Azure in Keycloak, like different complex policies that can be configured on Azure. But nevertheless, as for me, Azure Entra ID is the most expensive service. So, yeah, as all architects like to say, all depends on context. So all of them can be used, and all of them are good solutions, and everything can be implemented. But decide what is better for your particular case. In your particular case. That's all. Thank you for your attention, and please, I'm ready for your questions. Unfortunately, son.
Okay, let me ask you. Thank you for your presentation.
Okay, I can see you. Sorry.
Okay. So, first of all, I think the Microsoft Entra ID is free. It's a bit mistake, a small mistake. So, my question: how you manage? You tell that you have hundreds of services, right?
For example, yes.
For example, how you manage the access between services?
This is good question. In these cases, yeah, my attention, my main idea was based on authentication flow between user and backends and service, not between services. For service to service interaction, of course, the best way is to use client grant type when you have client ID, client secret, and you store it on your service side, on backend service side, and use it to interact between services. Of course, yes. If we are talking about interaction between services in one network, it's not necessary to use authorization server. But in some cases, for example, in fintech infrastructure layer, it can be used even this. If you are talking about interaction between third-party services, yeah, usually, yeah, this is client ID, client secret pair that you receive from your service, or you share it, and it's not necessary to implement this complex solution. And this is usual flow when server requests authentication token, access token from authorization server, and use it and send it to backend, and then backend then again using this token validate it using public key or special endpoint. Yeah, unfortunately, maybe fortunately, the main idea of this presentation was to show the connection between users and web browsers, web front-end applications, and backend services, and authenticate users, not services, because this is very, very complex, to be honest, topic again, especially if we are talking about device authentication, for example, laptops, and different systems. And in this case, I will agree with you. Active Entra ID is the best solution, especially for Microsoft stack like Windows and so on. Yeah. Regarding is Entra ID free or not, to be honest, I opened today a price list and I saw that this is about $6 per user.
No, it's free.
Hmm.
Maybe it's additional payment for the Active Directory. I don't know, but by default, Microsoft Entra ID is
Yeah, if it's free, okay, it can be free if you use existing Active Directory maybe and connect it to it, right? But if you are using it as user pool, so the whole solution like in AWS, yeah, maybe yeah, I guess you should pay. User pool in AWS, yeah, you're right. So user authorization server in cloud solution contains into parts. Identification service plus or identity service plus user pool. Together, it's an authorization server. You can replace user pool with Active Directory or DAP service or something else, or you can yeah, use everything together. Maybe yeah, but Active Directory is included in default option for Azure. For Entra ID is paid. User pool AWS Cognito is free for 500 users. Keycloak, of course, is free for.
There is some questions from YouTube.
YouTube?
Two,
Okay.
from YouTube chat. The first one is where will you store refresh token? That's not so easy question, and it can cause a lot of security vulnerabilities.
Oh, good question. Yeah, really token. Refresh token can be stored on. Just a second. Let me find the good example. Sometimes this is not about this particular reference architectures, but if you have this flow authorization code grant flow, when backend is responsible to interact with authorization server and it receives access token plus refresh token, it can store a refresh token. And you can see here, but get a new access token by refresh token is in this authorization code grant flow is again from front-end, backend, and then backend authorization server. And you can implement its own logic to store tokens in database and, for example, rotate it, allow no more than 10 tokens, for example. It depends on your authorization server. But the most part of modern authorization servers has a rules for authorization tokens, and it is out of the box. It means that you configure that for Keycloak, I would like to have a way to rotate, to allow only, I don't remember how many by default tokens, refresh tokens for the same user, and you can, not sure, but looks like there is API even to revoke refresh token. Because, in this schema, access token is retrieved from authorization server directly from frontend. If you send this refresh token to revoked refresh token to authorization server returns error because, yeah, there is internal validation. Not sure about Cognito, to be honest, because, really Cognito has less flexibility and features than Entra ID and Keycloak, and Cognito has a special advanced option. Maybe something is included in it. To be honest, I don't remember. I can answer right now.
Okay, and the second one, for the Microsoft Entra ID diagram, the API management services validates the access token by request to IDP. Why is it so? Why not just use signature validation? And
this is another not real request. This is not real request. You just set a path to public key, and it yeah, you can reuse it. Just this is not a real request to Entra ID. As here, this is not real request for token validation. It doesn't matter that each request, Lambda authorizer requests a user pool and check it. And here the same, it's not a real request. As I remember, you can update this public key in some time. It will be updated on these services, but it doesn't matter that it doesn't cache it. It should cache public key. That's why not so familiar with API management. Maybe something can be even done without public key, just signature. But yeah, I guess at least in here 100% you define only URL for public key, and this URL is available for user pool, and Lambda caches it and reuse it. So it's not a real request.
That's all the questions from our YouTube chat. So if someone of you wants to ask.
Very, very complex topic. A lot of different things that we can discuss. For example, service-to-service authentication. This can be even a separate meetup and meetup topic. And if someone can prepare it, I will be happy and will participate too. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
Ну, час. Ничего себе. Два начали.